Are they mine? I was 32 the day a single question split my life in half. I had never known how many edges a voice could have until I heard his, my husband's, or the man who used to be my husband, crack across the playground by the swings we donated when times were gentler. I'd come in a hurry from my nursing shift scrub top, hidden under a cardigan that smelled like menthol and coffee, and found him already there, standing stiff as a courtroom lectern, looking at our boys as if they were exhibits and not sons. I remember thinking absurdly that I should fix the sleeve of his coat because it had always folded wrong at the wrist. But then he asked it. Are they mine? And the question rang in the air like a fire alarm you can't shut off with your palms. Around us, mothers pulled strollers closer, a father with a newspaper looked up with the shy curiosity of someone overhearing a prayer. I said nothing. The mouth is a traitor. It wants to tell the truth, even when the heart plans to run. I stood there. A woman who learned to chart breaths and measure pulses, but who had never managed to take her own. A divorced nursing student turned emergency room nurse, a firstborn daughter, who had once promised she would end the inheritance of humiliation that ran through the women in my family like a river of iron. I should have said his name. I should have softened my shoulders. Instead, I counted the swings 1, 2, 3, 4, and tried to breathe through the static that filled my head. He always knew where to place a blade. He had the gift of asking questions that sounded like they were made of morals, not malice, and I had the weakness of wanting to answer correctly, even if correctness cost me blood. But that day, the air felt raw with something older than us, a memory my mother used to hush with the back of her hand, and a whisper. Don't wake what sleeps, darling. Don't dig where the dirt still breathes. And yet, I had already dug into old folders, into sealed envelopes, into a story that had been told wrong before I was even born. The secret's edges glinted in my bag. I could feel the weight of proof the way you feel a storm before the first drop hits. I believed in truth the way children believe in magic, until I learned how truth behaves when it's dragged through a house built on favors and threats. It doesn't glow. It growls. Our boys flew forward, their legs making straight, clean lines, their bodies unaware of the mathematics about to be written over their names. He wanted an answer. I had one, and it was complicated. I had tested, doubted, tested again. I had sat with a pastor, with a lawyer, with the loose boards under my bed, where I kept things I wasn't ready to show the light. In the hospital, when a siren splits the night, you don't ask whether the blood belongs to a good man or a liar. You stop it. At home, I had tried to stop a different kind of bleeding, the kind that comes when a story is being told about you by someone who profits if you never speak. My mother had died with 3 different last names in her dresser drawer. She taught me the recipe for survival: keep a quiet mouth and a long memory. But she had also left a box tape yellowed string frayed, and inside it, a lineage of carefully preserved pain. Birth certificates with margins crowded by notes, letters with pieces cut out, like someone had fed them through a hungry pair of scissors, a photograph of a baby with my eyes and a date that did not fit any timeline. And beneath all of that, a document I could barely hold without shaking. If you ever feel crazy, darling, it's because someone is working very hard to make you forget the order of events. I learned the order. I learned what had come first, and what came later, and what was changed after. If truth was a body, then men like my ex-husband were morticians. They dressed it, powdered it, set its mouth into a smile, and told you not to cry at how beautiful it looked. So when he asked, I kept my eyes on the boys on the tiny socks. He never remembered to match on the scar above Eli's eyebrow from the time he ran too fast toward Joy and punished himself on the corner of the coffee table. Are they mine? He asked, as if ownership were the only language that ever mattered. I loved these boys in a way that made God feel both close and far, like a laugh caught in the throat. Mine was a word I hated and needed. It was a door and a chain, a word you whisper into hair, and also a word you throw like a rope towards someone drifting away. I wanted to say what I had rehearsed in the mirror, the speech with the calm logic and the precise sequence of facts, the one where I unfolded the paper and like a woman untying her own gag, let the truth out. But the playground did not deserve a trial. It deserved mercy. Not here, I said finally. You don't get to make them hear this the first time with strangers watching. He flinched. I'd said them, and his eyes flicked to the swings, as if the word itself could bruise. The wind changed, and brought me the faintest smell of his cologne, the one he started wearing after the affair, as if a different scent could persuade me he was a different man. You pick up these small facts when your life is on fire, the way betrayal smells expensive and apology smells rehearsed. We had court soon. Not for this, not yet. For custody. For commas in a judgment that would become the geometry of our days. But I had decided it would also be for the history I carried in my mother's ragged box, for the test results sealed in a manila envelope I had hidden in a cookbook no one ever touched, because grief had turned us into people who ordered dinner from our phones. In court, they would ask for evidence. I had it. He had questions. I had the kind of answers that transform a family into an echo you can't trace back to one mouth. Not here, I said again, softer, as if I were asking a patient to unclench a hand around the hurt that was saving them and killing them at the same time. He looked at me with the face I almost recognized, the one from before the late nights and the password changes, and the message that blinked on his screen while our youngest slept on his chest. He opened his mouth, closed it, and left without saying another word. Our boys swung on, pumping their legs, learning for themselves how to make a body move higher without anyone pushing from behind. I stood still and let the question hang above me like weather. I thought of my mother's voice of babies born with names already rewritten, and I decided that maybe revenge wasn't a blade at all. Maybe it was a ledger. Maybe it was simply making the record whole. The night before court, I lay awake with the manila envelope on my chest like a second heart. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice. Are they mine? And every time it sounded less like a question and more like a verdict. The boys slept down the hall, tangled in sheets printed with cartoon rockets, oblivious to the storm gathering over their names. I envied them the way sleep came to them like forgiveness. For me, the dark was an interrogation room where the walls whispered, "Tell it all," or "Keep quiet forever." In the morning, I dressed slowly. Black dress hair pulled back, no jewelry except my mother's ring. Courtrooms are built for theater, and I had learned that costumes matter. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with his lawyer, his tie knotted too perfectly to be his own work. He didn't look at me, and that hurt more than the glare would have. Indifference is sharper than hate. It makes you question if you were ever real. When the judge asked if there were new matters to bring forward, my hand trembled but rose. His lawyer objected too late, irrelevant, inflammatory. The judge waved him down, weary but curious. And that was when I opened the envelope. My voice broke, but I forced it steady. I told them about my mother's box, about the altered documents, about the DNA tests that proved not absence of paternity, but something worse, a pattern of falsification orchestrated by his family long before I entered the picture. They had rewritten identities like men rewrite contracts, moving names and heirs like chess pieces. He finally looked at me then. His face drained, his mouth forming a silent no. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he did. I recognized that expression. It was the look of a man who had spent his life benefiting from lies, suddenly realizing the lies had sprouted teeth. The courtroom tilted. My body felt like glass under a hammer, every nerve vibrating with both terror and relief. I handed the documents over. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I spoke the words that had lived in my throat for months. You asked if they're yours. They are not yours to own. They are their own, and I am theirs. What you built was on borrowed blood, and now the truth will outlive you. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. The judge cleared his throat, shuffled papers, ordered recess. His lawyer leaned close, whispering furiously, but he didn't move. He just stared at me as if I had reached inside him and flipped a switch he didn't know existed. Outside, I sat on the courthouse steps, the autumn air sharp as vinegar in my lungs. I wanted to collapse, but I couldn't. I was the pillar holding 4 boys upright. My phone buzzed with messages from friends who knew where I was, who sent hearts and prayers and words like strength. But none of them knew the weight of telling the truth when it meant detonating the only life your children had ever known. When he finally emerged hours later, his tie loosened, he stopped in front of me. No words, no apology, just a look hollow and haunted. I realized then that revenge isn't fire, it's ice. It freezes a man where he stands, forces him to see the ruins he cannot rebuild. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I only stood, brushed the dust from my dress, and walked away. Behind me, the courthouse loomed like a graveyard for secrets. In my chest, the second heart finally stilled. That night, when the boys were finally asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen with the lights off. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, steady and indifferent, like time itself moving on whether I was ready or not. My hands rested on the table, palms open, as if I were waiting for someone to place something in them. A blessing, a punishment, I wasn't sure. I had imagined that telling the truth would feel like shedding a skin, like stepping into a cleaner, brighter self. Instead, I felt raw, exposed, as though every nerve ending was pressed against the cold world with no protection. The documents were now in the court's hands, their inked lines no longer just my private torment, but official record. The boys had no idea yet. To them, their father was still the man who bought them baseball gloves and missed their recitals, who taught them how to tie shoelaces, but never showed up for parent-teacher conferences. How would I tell them that their last name carried ghosts, that the bloodlines they thought were steady had been rewritten by men in suits long before they were born? I whispered to the dark, asking my mother if she could see me. If she knew I had chosen exposure over silence. I thought of her hands, always cracked from factory work, always gentle when she smoothed my hair. And I prayed she was proud, even if her ghost shook her head at the mess I was making. Days passed. News spread quickly in a town where gossip was currency. At the hospital where I worked, I felt eyes on me, colleagues whispering. Some offered support, squeezes on the shoulder, soft words about bravery. Others looked at me like I was reckless, a woman too foolish to keep her mouth shut when quiet could have bought her peace. I understood both reactions. Truth unsettles. It doesn't politely knock, it kicks down doors. Then came the boys' questions. It started with the eldest, cautious and sharp-eyed, asking why Daddy hadn't come for his weekend visit. I told him there were things being decided in court, that adults sometimes had to face hard truths. His lower lip quivered, but he nodded like a soldier receiving orders. The younger ones followed, their confusion blooming into anger, then into silence. Nothing cuts deeper than your child looking at you as if you've stolen their safe world. One evening he showed up outside the house, not with gifts or apologies, but with desperation in his eyes. He begged me not to tell the boys the details, not yet. He said they didn't need to know how broken the family history was, how much deception threaded through their name. I looked at him, this man I had once loved enough to build a future with, and I realized he was no longer capable of distinguishing between protecting children and protecting himself. You asked if they were yours, I said softly, standing between him and the doorway. They are not possessions. They are not proof of your pride or casualties of your shame. They are children, and I won't let them live in lies the way we did. For the first time, his eyes filled with tears, not for me, not even for them, but for himself. He understood finally that the legacy of power his family had hoarded was dissolving, that the empire of names and forged documents was crumbling. He left without another word. His footsteps echoed down the driveway, each one sounding like an ending. That night I told the boys a softened version of the truth. I said families sometimes carried secrets that were not their fault, that our love didn't change no matter what history had hidden. The eldest cried silently, face buried in my lap. The younger ones asked questions that broke me into smaller pieces. But I held them all, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that they would grow up free, that the sins of the past would not chain them, that truth could hurt, but it could also heal. Lying awake later, I realized revenge had already done its work. It hadn't come with fire or blood. It had come with paper, with ink, with the courage to speak aloud what others wanted buried. Karma perhaps was simply the truth finding its way out, no matter how many hands tried to push it back down. Weeks turned into months, and the courtroom battles dragged on like storms that refused to pass. Each hearing felt like reopening a wound that had barely scabbed over. His lawyer tried to twist my words, painting me as unstable as a bitter woman bent on revenge. I sat there in silence, listening to their narratives about me, and I realized how easy it is for men with polished shoes and expensive ties to invent stories about women, stories that erase our strength and turn us into caricatures. But I had something they didn't: the truth. And though it weighed heavy, it was unshakable. Every time they tried to corner me, I leaned on the documents, on the history written in my mother's hand, on the science of the tests I had hidden for months. They could sneer at my character, but they could not erase the ink on those pages. The day the judge finally spoke his ruling, I felt my breath hitch, as though my entire life had been suspended between syllables. He granted me primary custody, recognizing the deception that had woven through our marriage. He ordered supervised visits until further review. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. Enough to keep my boys close enough to know their nights would end under my roof, where secrets weren't smothered but spoken. When I left the courthouse, the autumn had surrendered to winter. The air was sharp, filled with the smell of wood smoke. Reporters had started circling, hungry for scandal, and I kept my eyes on the ground as I walked past their questions. I wasn't a headline. I was a mother, clawing through wreckage to give her children something solid to stand on. At home, I started building a new rhythm. Breakfasts with mismatched bowls, school runs with laughter in the car, quiet evenings, where the boys sprawled across the living room floor, drawing rockets and monsters. Slowly, they began to trust me again, to see that even though their father's world had cracked, ours could still be whole. There were nights I cried into my pillow, afraid they would grow up resenting me, afraid that in exposing their father I had stolen something irreplaceable from them. But then one of them would crawl into my bed during a thunderstorm or whisper, "I love you, Mom," as I tucked them in, and I knew I hadn't destroyed them, I had chosen them. And yet the past didn't let go so easily. His family tried to interfere, sending letters, calling late at night, threatening lawsuits. They said I was tarnishing their name, dragging their reputation through the mud. I laughed bitterly at that. Mud was too kind a word for what they had buried people in for decades. I stopped answering their calls, stopped letting their poison enter my home. One evening, I found myself back at the playground where it all began. The swings were empty, creaking in the cold wind. I stood there, remembering his voice, that question that had cracked my life open. Are they mine? For so long I thought the question was about blood, about ownership. But standing there, I realized it had always been about something else: love. Who truly claims a child? The one who gives them a name, or the one who gives them a safe place to belong? I closed my eyes and saw my mother's face, her tired smile, her whispered warnings. She had carried her secrets to the grave, but I had broken the pattern. Maybe my children would hate me for it one day, or maybe they would thank me. Either way, they would know. And knowing is always better than being shackled by lies. As the wind rattled the chains of the swings, I whispered into the empty playground. They're not yours. They're not mine. They are theirs, and they will be free. For the first time in years, my chest loosened. The truth was no longer a weapon or a burden, it was a seed. And I had planted it, even if it had taken pain to do so. Like, share, and subscribe if my story touched you, because no one should walk through betrayal alone, and every voice matters when secrets try to silence us. Leave me a comment with your thoughts, and tell me if you've ever found strength in the truth, no matter how painful it was.